Thank you, Catherine. What a great honor for me to be here. Not anymore as a student, only as a fellow. But while I was a student here, I took two incredible classes. One was Strategizing for Human Rights with Doug Johnson, where they teach you how to choose your allies for your human rights campaign. But then I also took another important class called Stopping Mass Atrocities, the role of the ICC and the Security Council. And my two professors at the time, Catherine Sickens and Luis Moreno, I was trying to convince them that crimes against humanity were occurring in Venezuela at that time. They were not that convinced. We're talking about 2015 beginning. And when we tried to analyze how campaign could start around this subject, we thought that the new Secretary General of the OAS, Luis Almagro, could be a good ally to endorse this idea, to go maybe to the ICC and endorse the idea that crimes against humanity were committed in Venezuela. Well, I did a paper, and that was all. I don't think I get it an A+. But 1 year after, a new tragedy started in Venezuela. No? Thousands of people start to being put in jail again, hundreds being tortured by the regime, more than 150 people being killed, were killed at the moment. And one day, Luis Moreno Ocampo called me and told me, hey, do you remember your paper? I think we should make it real. I think we should go to DC, talk to Luis Almagro, and find a way who can make this real. The good news is that after a week after that, Almagro was starting to talk about crimes against humanity in Venezuela. So we just take an airplane, we went there and talked to him, and he loved the idea because, and of course this was also thanks to Luis. He knew that Almagro needed more than just his opinion. He needed a panel of experts to study and to analyze what was happening in Venezuela, were real crimes against humanity. I was involved in that process also, and I was surprised by hearing for the first time in an international audience the victims of these atrocities. I heard that the fathers of Juan Pernalete, who was killed in those protests, and they, after that, thanks us, because it was the first time that they were here outside Venezuela. Because it's also very sad as a Venezuelan that no one is speaking about what is happening in their country. And I also have to thank Almagro because of that. And the reason why we choose him is because he was the first figure of authority in an important position at international level, like the Secretary General of the Organization of American States, that was speaking truly of what was happening in Venezuela, the tragedy that was happening in Venezuela. So because of that, we have to thanks to him that not only this investigation that he's going to explain occurred at the OAS, but also he put Venezuela in the international agenda. So only some weeks ago, at the General Assembly of the UN, Venezuela was one of the main topics for the first time. And I don't know if he will agree with me, but I think that was because of him. He exercised leadership in the words of Ronald Heifetz when he explained to us in these classes that it's even more difficult to exercise leadership in a position of authority because of the constraints that you have, and maybe he can talk about that you have in those positions. But he managed a way to transform an idea into reality. He needed to convince all the countries to not oppose this investigation. And that was thanks to him. He not only that, he needed later to convince other countries, Latin American countries, to endorse this investigation and refer the case to The Hague. And this happened. So he not only helped the Venezuelan situation, he expanded the international system of justice. He approached the ICC to Venezuela and to the tragedy that we're living right now, it's interesting that now Venezuelans know about the ICC, know about the Rome Statute. We also, as a human rights activist, we collect signatures, 1,000 signatures to support this idea. And I think that's also the power of this. Like we brought a court that is in Europe to something to be the hope of Venezuelans that doesn't see any hope for a resolution in the short terms, but also the hope of justice, bringing justice to them, to the victims. And I was a victim once. I still feel like I'm a victim. I'm living the exile. I can't go back to my country. I was in a cell once, and thanks to international support, I was released. But you know, my friends spent there at least for 2 or 3 or 4 more years. And I know what it means to cross the border, like the thousands of Venezuelans that are crossing these days to Colombia, to Ecuador. I spent a week in a refugee center in Colombia. I had to cross without passports because they were confiscated by the regime. And I know this tragedy. I know how we felt lonely before the leadership of Almagro. So for us, it's a true hero. And I'm sure he will be remembered like that. I think it's an honor for him, for us at the Kennedy School to have him here. I want to also read about his biography a little bit. Before he arrived to first as Secretary General, he was elected by unanimous vote. 33 members of the state members voted for him. Only one abstention. His first message when he arrived to the OAS was more rights for more people. He was a foreign minister for President Mujica. That's another interesting fact. He comes from a left party, political party, Frente Amplio. And this gave him even more credibility when he raised his voice for Venezuela. And he also had to deal with that confrontation inside his own country. He made great actions, like he brought Guantanamo former prisoners to Uruguay. He also received Syrian families, refugee Syrian families to Uruguay as a way to show their support for what was happening. He was an ambassador in China for 5 years. He also won the Foreign Policy magazine title of Leading Global Thinker. And he's a lawyer by profession. He's married, and he has 7 children. His most important accomplishment, according to him. But according to me, again, according as a Venezuelan, and I hope all of you will enjoy this panel and hear from him the story he's going to tell, is that by helping Venezuela, we are helping the world to be better, to expand the power of the ICC, to bring the ICC closer to people, and to bring hope for those who are suffering, and maybe help in the recovery of Venezuela and the Venezuelan democracy. Thank you very much. And please welcome Luis Almagro.
First of all, to express my own gratitude. This story for me started with Tamara Sujo coming to my office, asking me to represent the cases that she had, the denouncements she made about the Venezuelan situation to the ICC. A couple of weeks later, appeared Luis Moreno Ocampo and Rodrigo with this brilliant idea, because I really didn't know so far how to deal with that request from Tamara about creating a panel of experts, about having audiences, and about picking up and documenting the abuses, human rights violations, but mainly crimes against humanity committed in Venezuela. So I'm very grateful to that idea, to how it was implemented, to the work made by Luis Moreno Ocampo, I'm very grateful also to the work of the Inter-American Human Rights Commission. They were there, they provided information, their reports. They were extremely supportive to what we were doing. But now I want to look into the future. Maybe I will tell you a little bit more of what the investigation that was done. But I want to look into the future. For me, it is time for the ICC to investigate Maduro's dictatorship and crimes against humanity committed in Venezuela. You know, I often wonder if it would make a material difference for the victims of the Maduro dictatorship if the International Criminal Court did not exist. I question if the ICC means something to the millions that have fled hunger and disease caused by the dictatorship, and to those who have been subject to political persecution and torture. And if the ICC symbolizes some chance of change for the sick Venezuelans who wait for treatment and medicines that will never arrive while Maduro remains in power. I question if the existence of the ICC means optimism and the possibility of bringing closure and justice to all victims of crimes against humanity committed by the regime since February 2014. I want, of course, for the ICC to make a difference to the people of Venezuela, and that it brings hope to the relatives of the victims who were murdered and those who have survived. But the reality is that to the victims, so far, the ICC does not mean much, at least not yet. And we need to change that reality. We need the ICC to act, being true to its intention and its mandate, not abiding to whatever political commitment and pressure. For those of us who work in the ranks of international institutions, which are elitist by nature, we know the context of the Rome Statute, the functions and role of the ICC, and the bureaucratic web that exists to enforce universal jurisdiction of international human rights law that seek justice. We must bring international institutions closer to the people, to the victims of inhumane acts for which these institutions were created in the first place. Not being close to the needs of the victims, we have this feeling since 2014, who seek justice for extreme inhumane acts is a tragic truth, because international organizations underpinned by international law that exist to protect human rights are a product of atrocities committed in the past. This is not only immoral, but sadly ironic. The history of world wars, genocide, and crimes against humanity in the 20th century paved the way for the creation of an international order so that humans would avoid the repetition of such acts and would be bring those responsible for atrocities if repeated. Reality is worse than that. International institutions sometimes not only are detached from the sufferings of the victims, but in the end seems to be attached to politics, seems to have political reactions, seems to try to find political paths. And they have succumbed to group-think mentality predominating in the town where they operate. And sometimes, even worse, to a superficial diplomatic life in a comfort zone guided by the principle of least effort. The ICC exists to serve justice for victims of crime against humanity, who have no way to seek justice on their town, on their own, in their own country, especially if such country is still governed by dictators. The criteria used by the ICC to make decisions and operate, this is not the humanity criterion that predominates. If it was amidst self-evident truths of the extreme inhumane crimes committed by the Maduro regime, and after the referral of the case by 8 states, would have at least announced the start of the investigation by now. From the OAS, we are trying to change that reality. We absolutely reject the principle of least effort, and we work tirelessly against the law of inertia that we have seen time and again at work in the international community. We need an external force, and the ICC must be that external force. The external force that changed the motion of the Venezuelan dictatorship. The actions of the prosecutor Fatou Bensouda specifically should move towards justice in Venezuela. If not external force is exerted, inertia and status quo will continue, and the Maduro regime will continue committing crimes against humanity and will continue to enjoy impunity while the world stands idle. Even though we have a robust international human rights system, justice regrettably does not arrive by default and inertia. Justice must be sought and pursued with persistence for the victims of the Maduro dictatorship that cannot find it on their own and are left to their own devices. The prosecutor of the ICC has an opportunity to do what is according to international law, to do what is right, to stand by the victims. Perhaps that way the ICC and international law can start meaning something to the people who personally suffer injustices every day in Venezuela. We need to reinforce a different nature, to pass from what we are living of an elitist nature to a normative that protects the victims, an approach that protects the victims and the people. A criteria that passes from the political point to the humanitarian point of view. A scope that should move from Africa and definitely becoming universal. Functioning, not slow and reactive, but proactive and faster. Silence is itself a prerequisite for the continuation of suppression and terror, and by choosing silence, we become accomplices. That was said by Amnesty International. Do you know what political persecution by the state means? Have you ever been tortured? Do you have a relative who has been murdered in a street protest? Do you have a daughter who was raped while being unlawfully detained? Have you been denied access to food or treatments like dialysis and chemotherapy because of how you voted in an election? Have you been intimidated and persecuted or forced into exile for thinking differently? If you have, there is no doubt you would want justice to be done. If you have not, there is no doubt you would want justice for these crimes. In Venezuela, there have been at least 131 murder victims from 2014 and 2017 protests, where the perpetrator has been identified as a member of the state security and or the paramilitary forces. 8,292 judicial executions were recorded in 2015 and 2016 alone. At least 12,000 people have been arbitrarily detained or imprisoned. Hundreds have been tortured, and 7,343 people have been prosecuted for political reasons. Isn't that widespread? All of these victims and their relatives are still waiting for justice. 8 countries have acted and referred the case to the International Criminal Court. Leaders face a choice going forward: act to effectively help the Venezuelan people return to democracy, or look the other way as they suffer under dictatorship. The victims of the dictatorship need the world to act. Sanctions in place need to be strengthened and extended. During the last 4 years of blood and repression, the Maduro regime has repeatedly and cynically used the illusion of dialogue to stave off international pressure, while tightening its hold on power. At this point, anyone who plays along is either a fool or an accomplice. As the Venezuelan dictatorship keeps buying time, its victims still await justice. As international leaders, but also as human beings, we must not succumb to indifference. That only serves to delay justice and prolong the suffering of the victims. The OAS is unequivocally on the side of the victims. We have prepared, in collaboration with a dependent panel of international experts, a report that found reasonable grounds to believe that crimes against humanity were committed by the regime in Venezuela. These facts that I formally presented to the ICC are more than powerful data, figures, and lists. The testimonies of victims are raw evidence of the grief inflicted by the deliberate, widespread, and systematic crimes of the Maduro regime. We cannot and do not accept impunity in any shape or form, and we expect the international human rights community to share this conviction, and in particular, Fatou Bensouda, the prosecutor of the ICC. International leaders and institutions that exist to defend human rights must live up to their responsibilities. If not, they will be opening the way to a world where victims of inhumane crimes again are left without mechanisms to find justice. The OAS has activated all the international political and juridical mechanisms in purview to seek justice for Venezuela. The Inter-American Court of Human Rights, the Inter-American Human Rights Commission, the former United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detentions, and the United Nations Committee Against Torture. All have acted. The only institution that you see missing from this list, the only one with a responsibility that has not acted according to its competences so far, is the ICC. Would you hesitate to defend human dignity and seek justice for these heinous crimes committed by the Maduro dictators? Would you be afraid of doing so? We can't be kind to those who look the other way while atrocities are committed. Victims and their families wait with excruciating patience. Our patience, however, has run out. We will act and never give up until justice is done. We will not be silenced until the message of nevermore, once and for all, strike around the globe. I can present to you that after a comprehensive and short analysis of evaluation of the evidence, the panel of independent international experts considers that there are reasonable grounds that satisfy the standard of proof required by Article 53 of the Rome Statute for considering that acts to which the civilian population of Venezuela was subjected to dating back to at least February 2014 constitute crimes against humanity in accordance with Article 7 of the Rome Statute of the ICC. As a result, the panel of independent international experts recommended that the Secretary General of the OAS should submit this report and evidence collected by the General Secretariat of the OAS to the Office of the Prosecutor of the ICC for the purpose of opening an investigation into the crimes against humanity set forth therein. The Secretary General should invite state parties, as we did, to the Rome Statute to refer the situation of Venezuela to the Office of the Prosecutor of the ICC, and to call for the opening of an investigation into the crimes against humanity set forth in this report in accordance with Article 14 of the Rome Statute. That has been done, but we are keeping our path in order to bring more support to this. The report is divided into two parts. Part 1 was written by the General Secretariat of the OAS based on source material provided by witnesses, testified during these 3 rounds of public hearings organized by the General Secretariat. Testimonials from victims and family members of the victims submitted to the General Secretariat, as well as some written material and documentary evidence provided by the number of Venezuela and international non-governmental organizations and intergovernmental organizations, in addition to publicly available information. We have started considering the ongoing economic, political, social, and juridical crisis in Venezuela. Chapter 2 presents a summary of the testimony delivered by the witnesses. Chapter 3 describes the development of a policy that turned the country into a theater of military operations. The position of those identified as such were branded as internal enemy of the state, turning large segments of the civilian population into targets for the military, paramilitary, and regular security forces operating in a coordinated manner to defend the Bolivarian revolution. Articles 4, 9 address the specific acts to be considered under the elements of crimes against humanity codified in Article 7 of the Rome Statute. The General Secretariat has collected a large body of evidence detailing the widespread abuses, including the crimes of murder, imprisonment, torture, rape, and other forms of sexual violence, persecution, and enforced disappearance. Each chapter provides a sample of selected cases and incidents that demonstrate a pattern of the widespread and systematic commission of this crime by the government under their overarching plans to suppress and eliminate the political opposition in the country.
Before I ask President Santos to say a few words, I thought first I might see if we have some questions for the Secretary General about the referral from the audience.
What if the ICA does not accept the case? What will be this plan B?
First of all, the times of bureaucracy and justice are slow, and it is difficult to move them forward. Second, that in fact they have moved too slow, in a sense that since 2014, when first evidence of torture, murder, rape were presented to the ICC, there was practically nothing done. And if you see, we were doing the work of the ICC, this investigation, this collecting of information, all this that we have been presented, that should have been done by the ICC already. Right? So it's the other thing is that the rival plays too, and they have an embassy in The Hague. They have contacts with the Office of the Prosecutor and with the ICC. They put pressure. They come on into the General Assemblies. They make their game, and they also play international. They are, if you see, you see sometimes very strong facts, very clear facts. But these people come with a lie immediately, and trying to divide the truth always. It's a permanent tactic, about every single fact, every single person that has been tortured, about the murder of Fernando Albán, for example. Everything comes and comes the fact, and then they come with a different story. It doesn't matter how little support or how little evidence they have to support that story. It's a division of the truth that on which they work permanently. Fourth, they have some management behind, that it has been the most able management that I have ever seen done in a dictatorship. We have this Cuban management. Cuba is a country that practically it doesn't produce anything. It's been like the biggest parasite that the international community has ever had. Lived 40 years from the Soviet Union and then lived another 15 years of Venezuela. They have never had a cow that provided so much milk as Venezuela, regrettably. But they know how to oppress and repress. And they have been doing so in their country for decades. And they have been doing so in Venezuela, at least since 2014. So, all these factors are there. We have to, nevertheless, not to be engaged in their political games. What we need is to put the victims and the testimonials of the victims and the denouncers there in order to achieve justice. That is the role of the ICC. Nothing else in the middle. No playing their political games. No playing their this division of the truth. Not playing what they permanently do, trying to kill the messenger in order to have the side effect of killing the messenger. So just keep putting pressure and bringing more and more testimonies, more and more victims, more and more evidence, and to find the justice finally.
In the case that the ICC doesn't take up this case, or in the interim, what responsibility does the international community, as well as the government of Colombia, have to Venezuelans who have fled to Colombia, given that it is uncertain whether they can or will receive refugee status?
Not to open an investigation when you have so many denouncers is something that lacks a lot of vision of what justice is. If she doesn't open it, I will go for a concept that we have about crimes against humanity and human rights violation, that is universal justice. I will chase them through the nationals or residents of wherever they are, in the United States, in Argentina, in Brazil. I will look for justice in every country where these victims are in order to judge these dictators.
My question is very clear, and I think we have to also highlight that it's not only the crimes against humanity, the ordinary crimes, but that 500,000 people are in peril of dying this year, of which 280,000, according to Caritas, are children below the years of 5 years old for malnutrition, all due to the induced humanitarian crisis by a criminal government that is suppressing its people, of which 31 newborn children are dying daily, and 65% of their mothers will follow them to the grave after their deaths. And all that in this year. Taking that into account, my question is actually to see if there is another possibility, a shortcut, to bring this case up in the line of other cases, due to the fact that the ICC, besides being a complementary court, it also should prevent crimes against humanity. And at this point, crimes against humanity are still happening in Venezuela every day. 900 people are dying for lack of medicines daily. 900. That's close to 300,000 people a year. So my question would be, what can we do to try to preclude other cases that have been in the past and are under examination, to put Venezuela's case first, because it can still prevent other deaths and suffering of systematic persecution of a criminal regime? Thank you.
The thing is that, for what I have seen in the past, the ICC just go for the very close events that have already happened. And this event makes it more urgent that it's going on. And so far that dictatorship is there. It will go on. As you said, there are incredible campaigns of extermination. Some awful, like for example, I mentioned past. Now, those are kidney diseases. They need dialysis. They are killing them. They are just killing them. They are not providing the necessary treatment. I have doctors calling me, what can I do? What can I do? I feel like I'm a accomplice of this. And just day after day, you have 6, 7 more dying. Every day, there is a child dying because of bad nutrition. Every day, there are people that dying or almost dying because if you don't have the carnet de la patria, you cannot have even basic chemotherapy. So, plus the political persecution, plus. That should have been already the natural reaction of the ICC. That's how we deal with this, we start this, we make it stop. But it seems we see it differently. And I will keep all these denounces going on. And there is a solution that is the best solution of them all that would make the ICC unnecessary. That is to put down the dictatorship. But that we definitely need a stronger, bigger commitment.
I just have 2 comments. The first is that the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights presented its report on Venezuela in February with full evidence of the all gross human rights violations and the violation of separation of powers, violation of law, of democracy. So you have all the big picture with full and very consistent and solid evidence. And my second comment is that in the beginning of this month, we had our public hearings. We have our sessions in Colorado, and we had 3 public hearings concerning Venezuela. State representatives were there, and they emphasized that they are leaving the OAS. So at the end of the day, we will have, as a remaining arena in terms of international justice, the ICC, the UN. So I would say that the level of hope and the expectation towards ICC is even higher because they denounced the American Convention on Human Rights in 2014. And of course, they are still in charge of the pending cases, and also I'd like to mention one public hearing concerning refugees in Brazil, my country, from Venezuela, in Colombia, and the need to a more coordinated architecture or shared responsibilities among the states of the region to deal with this tremendous crisis, humanitarian crisis. So I just like to mention, to make those two comments.
I beg to disagree. They cannot leave the Organization of American States. First of all, because at the beginning I received a communique, a verbal note from the mission saying we denounce the Charter of Bogota and we are leaving the organization. 2 days later I received the President of the National Assembly then with another note saying that that request was unconstitutional. When we had that doubt, we decided to pass this to the juridical committee that is in Rio. The president then was Bolivia, the president of the Permanent Council, so didn't pass it to the committee in Rio. But meanwhile, somebody made a request to the Supreme Court in exile about it was legal or constitutional that they were requested to denounce the Charter of Bogota, the executive. And it was very clear, the Supreme Court, that they couldn't do that. So for me, this is not going on, and I have never started any procedure with them about their abandon of the organization. Nothing was requested or anything that should have been requested in order to allow this way out of the organization. So I think at a certain moment, we may have another kind of representation in the OAS from Venezuela. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this event. Very important. 20 years of the ICC, what has been its role, and I think that the Colombian case is a good case to analyze how the ICC played a role in our peace process. I will then make some comments about what Mr. Almagro just said, and try to put that in perspective of what should happen afterwards. The Colombian peace process is considered a very unique and original agreement that we finally reached, because it went much further than the usual peace agreements. We were the first agreement to put the victims in the center of the solution. We were the first agreement to actually submit and have the international law, the Rome Statute, and our own constitution very much into account to see what would be negotiated. The first agreement to have a 15-year plan to bring changes in the areas that had been affected by the conflict for so many years. So it's a case study that is being studied all around the world. What role did the ICC play in the whole process? I would say it was a very constructive role, because we used the ICC to press the different sides to advance. I was mentioning this in another event here at the university about ethics and the role of the ICC. The ICC was like a phantom, wandering around the process that scared people from one side and from the other. And sometimes it scared me also. And because sometimes, according to how people interpreted the role of the ICC, it became an obstacle to advance. And one cannot and never forget why the ICC was created, why the Rome Statute was negotiated. It was basically negotiated to facilitate the resolution of armed conflicts, and to do it without impunity. But this very first objective, facilitate the resolution of armed conflicts, is the main reason. And the complement, in my own view, the way I interpreted how it was negotiated and the role it should have, is yes, negotiate a resolution, but you can do it with certain conditions that take into account the advocates of human rights and justice. Comes down to that usual sort of dilemma between peace and justice. And where do you draw the line? It has always been a key issue in any negotiation, and there will always be people dissatisfied with whatever decision you take. Always people that would have liked more justice, other people which would have liked more peace. And we're living that experience in Colombia. But at one moment in time, the ICC became an obstacle, and that's when I say that it scared me, is because the people who were advocating a much harsher result for the war crimes, crimes against humanity, said the ICC will intervene if you agree on X or Y. And I remember very well a conversation I had with the prosecutor in Norway, and it was a very frank conversation, very open, and said, and I asked her outright, why do you exist? She was surprised. What do you mean? What kind of question is that? Yes, why are you here? In what capacity? As a prosecutor of the ICC, okay. And why was the ICC created? Well, where is the origin? And then we ended up with what I was trying to express to you. Your role cannot be to become a stumbling block in the resolution of our conflict. You must contribute and play your role that there is no impunity, but not the other way around. So please have a more constructive role, or at least don't, because there were sort of messages coming out. I don't know to what extent they were true or not, because many people sort of took advantage of their special relations with the ICC, and they said, no, the ICC is thinking this, ICC is thinking that. As always in these negotiations, there's a lot of manipulation of information, but anyway, that let's wait, I told the prosecutor, until we finish the process, and then we'll sit down and see if we comply with your expectations of having no impunity. And she said, okay, and I think this was a great decision, because then the phantom still was around, but I knew that it was not going to scare me. So we continued. And we used the ICC in both cases, both with the FARC, saying there is a real danger that if we negotiate, if we accept many of the things they wanted, the ICC will come in and go after you. And we also used the ICC against the military, saying, beware, because the ICC is even more prone to go after you. There is a biased tendency that comes from the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, that because the court only goes after the crimes committed by the state agents, not by guerrillas, then there is this sort of biased sensitivity that international courts will go more against the state agents than insurgency. But anyway, we used that in both ways, and that was very helpful. We ended up in what I consider was a correct equilibrium. My instructions to my negotiators were, go after as much justice as you can achieve that would allow us to have peace. And I think we went there. Some people say that we should have gone more. I was not risking the collapse of the negotiations by the rubber would not extend anymore. I think we went as far as we could. Everybody, when you analyze backwards, is a genius. You should have done this, you should have done that, but at that moment, I think we reached that equilibrium that was the best possible equilibrium that we could get between peace and justice. And in the implementation, we still use the ICC as a phantom, and it's been helping a lot. And as a matter of fact, the government was proposing a law to create a special tribunal for the military. And that is not what we agreed. I said that should not be accepted, but I'm not the government anymore. So they presented this to the Congress, I said, if you accept this, the ICC could come, because a special tribunal for the military against the agreement, and fortunately, yesterday, the Congress said no to that proposal. But what I want to stress is that the military were the ones, the military who in some way are guilty of some crimes against humanity or crimes against humanity, were the less enthusiastic about this tribunal, because they will get the benefits of the agreement, and if the ICC comes, then the consequences will be much harsher. So the ICC has played, the phantom of the ICC has played a very constructive role in the process that we negotiated, and I think, and I hope, the tribunal, the special tribunal for transitional justice is already working, is hearing the cases of both the military commanders and the officers and state agents. The Truth Commission is working very well. It is receiving the collaboration of the military. And it's something which we also negotiated, which is very important, to satisfy the victims, was the special unit to find disappeared people. We are having some problems with people that have been murdered, social leaders that have been murdered, mostly because one of the specific points in the agenda of this agreement was to start a very ambitious, but I think the only way to really find a structural solution to our problems of drug production, is to give the peasants an alternative. If you don't give the peasants an alternative, they will always go back to planting coca, and so we agreed with the guerrilla that did not want this point in the agenda because they would be accused of being drug traffickers. That's another story, but anyway, this situation is causing the Mexican cartels and the big mafias to kill. They're already to kill these leaders that are promoting the voluntary substitution because it's working, and they are seeing that this could eliminate their raw material for the business. And that is the main cause for this assassination of the leaders. The state is acting, should act with more efficiency in stopping these crimes, but anyway, this is a consequence of the agreement. Let me make a few comments on what our dear friend, the Secretary General of the OAS, has said about Venezuela. I think that there is no doubt of what he said. Crimes against humanity are being committed every day in Venezuela for a long time, and the evidence is there. I think nobody can question that. The only one who questions that is Maduro, who is in the most extreme and irrational state of denial. I have had to deal with that situation for a long time. Colombia is the country that suffers the most with this situation. Colombia is the country that is most worried about what is happening. We already have more than 1 million Venezuelans in Colombia, and the problem is getting bigger and bigger. So far, we have been able to manage the situation with, I would say, a high degree of pragmatism. The question that was asked about the refugee status is a good question. We we have received the Venezuelans with open arms. I tried very much to convince the Colombians that the Venezuelans are our brothers. They have been our brothers for centuries. They received many Colombians who were in difficulties in the past with generosity. We should reciprocate. We then said, and I decided that we were going to give them access to our health system, access to our education system, access to the training facilities to get jobs, but declaring them refugees has a lot of legal and fiscal consequences, which Colombia is not in the position to finance. We are financing with a tremendous effort what we're doing in more help to the hospitals to attend the Venezuelans, more help to the schools to incorporate the Venezuelan boys and girls in schools. But the legal acceptance of a status of refugee has other consequences that we have so far avoided, waiting also for more solidarity from the international community. They all say that we will help, but when they want to write a check, the check does not appear. And the tremendous pressure on the fiscal accounts of Colombia because of this process is increasing and increasing. However, we have made this effort. We will continue. I hope that the new government will continue. We created institutions, new institutions to cope with this problem. This is a problem that for us is completely new. We have never in our history had immigrants coming into Colombia. On the contrary, Colombians went out. 4 or 5 million Colombians were living outside. We sent delegations to Turkey to see how they cope with the Syrian refugees, and all around we brought people from the World Bank, from the Inter-American Development Bank, from the European banks and institutions to try to see how is it that we can cope better with this problem. And one thing that I did a tremendous effort, and I hope the government, the new government will continue, is avoiding this terrible sentiment of xenophobia. It's very difficult, and I saw pockets of it. It's difficult to convince a normal citizen that somebody arrives to his work and they say, you don't have no more work, and he says, why? Because I now have this Venezuelan friend who has offered him his work, which is equal or better than yours for 20% of what I was paying you. It's very difficult to tell this Colombian that he should not react to what is happening. And so we're trying to do everything possible to avoid that sentiment. So far, so good. So far, I think you have small pockets, but in general, the Colombians are still very much welcoming and supporting the help that we've given Venezuelans. Now, the ICC, I cannot contradict one single word of what Luis said. This is happening, we see it. I would go even worse. I have personally offered Maduro medicines because we know we have a border which is 2,200 kilometers, and we know what is happening exactly the other side of the border. People are dying of hunger, dying because they don't have the most basic medicine. We offered him, we will give you the medicine. He says, no, we don't have a crisis. We don't accept any help. That's why I say it's the most irrational case of denial that I've ever seen. And he continues to do this. And so I have no quarrel, and nobody really have a quarrel except the Maduro regime with what you were saying. Now, I think that what must be discussed is something further. How can the ICC be used to find a solution to the Venezuelan crisis? Because what we have to stop is the factory of victims. This is the discussion that we had with the war in Colombia. But let's concentrate first to stop the war, and then see how the victims and their rights can be repaired and their rights guaranteed. In the Colombian case, by different reasons, we start repairing the victims. It was on the upside down. It was upside down. We started repairing the victims before the conflict ended. With the law that I was having lunch yesterday with Ban Ki-moon. He went there as Secretary General. A famous law of repairing victims and restituting the land to peasants that were displaced by violence. So we started repairing victims before the conflict was ended. But in the end, I think if we can do both things at the same time, it will be perfect. But how can the ICC help to solve the situation? Everybody wants the guilty perpetrators to face justice. That's a fact. Now, how can that be used to solve the situation? Are the victims, like the case in Colombia, willing to allow transitional justice to be applied to the Maduro regime? Are they, or are they not? Could that be a way to solve a conflict, like every conflict that is solved, to design what they call a golden bridge, a way out for the regime in order to have a peaceful transition as soon as possible? Is the time right? Are the stakeholders, and when I mention stakeholders, I include China, and I include Russia, and I include, of course, Cuba. To what extent they can be pressed and they can be convinced in what I call a soft landing. Venezuela is a plane that ran out of fuel, and there's only two alternatives. The plane can crash. That for Colombia would be the worst, and I think for everybody, and for Venezuela would be the worst situation, because if the plane crashes, nobody knows what's going to happen. There are more than 1 million Venezuelans with AK-47 under the beds. They have been trained by the Cubans to defend the revolution. What could happen there? And if the Venezuelan migrants are right now still are my nightmare, and we have 1 million. If there's violence in Venezuela, in 2 weeks we could have 2 or 3 million or 4 million in violence. So we have to avoid the crash. Are the other stakeholders ready to play? This is the question. And how can the ICC play in the soft landing? I think that is the question that for the hopefully not for the next 20 years, but for the next 6 months could be resolved.
First, to express my gratitude, and I'm very honored to be here. I've been invited to come and to talk about the ICC and the OAS and the situation in Venezuela. It was an opportunity that we needed to grab, and it's something that we keep doing around. This message that we deliver here today is a message that we insist, like it or not. It's a message that will go on. like it or not, especially if it is not like it. If it is like it, of course. Second, about something that I didn't mention, the refugee status for the Venezuelans. That has also some consequences for the Venezuelans, of course. And it will limit them a little bit too. What they have seen is something unique. What we have seen is something unique. The European Union received 2 million Syrians, and the system cracked everywhere and suffered a lot and has a lot of political cost. Developed countries with a lot of infrastructure, with a lot of resources to provide. Now we have Latin American countries absorbing something like at least 2 million Venezuelans in the past 2 years. Without so much whining, without the resources, if sometimes the services were not enough even for their own nationals, and they keep receiving them, still they keep giving them practically the same conditions than their nationals. What Colombia is doing is admirable. Peru, Ecuador, Chile, Argentina, practically every country in the continent, Panama, Costa Rica. So, if we can go on like that for a while, it would be a good situation, an ideal situation. I have some concerns, and most of these Venezuelans will be undocumented in a short period, 6 months, 1 year, and then we'll need to give an answer to that, because we'll need to provide documents that allow them to travel around. We'll have to find a way, because you need to work, to study, to have health care, for whatever, you need a document. That will be extremely necessary. So I think the first crisis where we might have to think about the refugee status will be that, because then some documents also can be provided under that. If we can find another way, okay, even better. I think the ICC has a contribution to make about the Venezuelan regime and to achieve peace in Venezuela. The greatest advantage that Colombia has, it is a democracy. Here we have in Venezuela a dictatorship. And we have a dictatorship of the worst kind. This kind of thing, when we have the family of the president in jail in New York because of drug trafficking, when we have hundreds of millions of dollars of the vice president frozen in the United States because of drug trafficking, when we have the Minister of Home Affairs and sanctioned, and all the repressive of the authorities of the repressive system of Venezuela sanctioned because of drug trafficking, it is not so easy. This is also that we have behind a criminal logic. I mean, I was in Bridge Simón Bolívar some months ago, and I was thinking, when I was government in Uruguay, I would have seen all these people live in Uruguay. I definitely was doing something wrong. Definitely I had to fix something. And I need to address some problems in order to fix that situation. But here, we see the incomplete indolence of these dictators. They are not connected to the suffering of the people. People die because of the lack of dialysis, it's not their problem. People die because of lack of insulin, it's not their problem. People die because of lack of chemotherapy, it's not their problem. Children die of malnutrition, it's not their problem. Children die in hospital because they don't have anticonvulsants. It's not their problem. They are not doing anything to fix any of these problems. They are not providing anything to the people. So this criminal logic will not really remove this. There are criminals that sometimes present themselves to a police station and say, please take me to jail because I have been committing this and these crimes. I don't think that will be the case of the Venezuelan dictators. If we not take them to prison, they will never come and surrender by themselves. They will never step down because, of course, corruption and drug trafficking block their exit doors. That is the biggest problem that the country has.
Thank you so much.